everyone. Here's my top 10 ways that we have to think about these proxies. Firstly, it's a whole new world out there. Forget about what you thought before. The government, in the infiniteness of its wisdom and public consultation, decided we need lots of forms to govern things in condos. And you know what? I don't actually disagree necessarily that the spirit behind a lot of these forms was pretty good, but it's kind of the execution and the details and the transition. This is what it was supposed to make you do. Sit there at your desk with beautifully organized things and meetings and procedures and, really bring some good structure to our condo industry and buildings. But I think this is more how most people feel. Related to that, time for some fall cleaning. What does that mean? It means that you'll do yourself a favor generally by not totally forgetting, but kind of archiving, if you will, everything you thought you knew about notices, about meeting deadlines, notice deadlines, stuff like that, because things have changed. It's better to kind of wipe that, archive it, and get the new stuff into your brain. I'm getting a lot of calls, understandably saying, well, yeah, I don't have to worry about that until 15 days before. And I say, well, what about the preliminary notice? Stuff like that. So get all your old forms, archive them nicely, and then maybe, just burn them. Go ahead. Let's get acquainted. Better to get out ahead of this, dig into these forms, figure out not just what they say, but what they do. Why are they there, and what's their purpose, and how they fit into the jigsaw of what we do every day. And not just like a little bit acquainted, but like really acquainted. Get in there, open them up, make yourself a tea, and just take an hour reading through exactly what they are, and then to the extent that you don't fall asleep, look at those regs and also kind of figure out the timelines. There's a lot of good stuff written online by our office and other offices, setting out kind of some of the thought around these new forms. Plan ahead. This is a biggie. Unfortunately, we'll get some calls where a notice now hasn't been sent out a new notice in the time it's supposed to be sent out, or someone hasn't sort of thought ahead as to what are my obligations in the coming year going to be. I like to see this, a firefighter with a nice log, planning ahead on a fire inspection so that nothing goes wrong. Although you may feel a little bit like it's mission control by the time you read through all the regs, all the forms, diarize them all, figure out who gets what, and how you do it, and what you fill it out, and what you attach. But it's a growing process, and we're all there together. Don't throw away that free calendar. Oh, sorry, that's my calendar till retirement. That's nothing to do with this. It actually helps if you have a meeting coming up, or for the whole year, frankly, given that we have to send out our picks twice a year and all kinds of other stuff. Maybe you plot it out. Maybe you actually get out that old calendar from the dentist and you just plot out when the things have to go out. Not only will it help you not miss it, but it'll help kind of cement in your brain how these timelines are starting to work. Read every word twice and then one more time, because they're dense and they're not terribly well written. And I don't think anyone's doubting that anymore. So we want you to go from here to here. You read it. If you still don't have an answer, fine. There's places to find answers, but a lot of times just sitting with it and going, okay, well, I'll read it again, and maybe what are they trying to tell me? What are they trying to do here? And that's not always obvious. Next one. Open up and say, what do I mean by that? When you're using the forms, not especially, but electronically as they come, you want to make sure that you're not keeping it all bundled up. You'll notice, and you'll see in the presentation, all kinds of places where you click to expand, click to add lines, click, and then 5 more questions come up. You want to instead open it up and see all the splendor that the form has, because sometimes you'll actually see the answer in clicking. One concern I have seen is sometimes a building will send out, the proxy in particular, the proxy form with all the lines condensed, nothing expanded for who the candidates are or where you fill in your vote or anything like that. And now we're in a pickle because the owner might not know to go online and get the expanded version. They're starting to write stuff in and initial it, and it's a mess. Make sure you get familiar with how the form actually operates electronically. What's my purpose? Ask my therapist. But in terms of the form, does everyone know what this is here? That's the sorting hat from Harry Potter, where you put on your head and it tells you whether you're a Slytherin or I'm probably a Slytherin. When you're sitting with a form and you do, what on earth is this section doing? What is this supposed to be? sit back and go, okay, well, what's this form doing? What's the purpose of this form? I'm not saying that that's going to answer the question every time, but it may help give you some context. Well, oh, it's a preliminary notice, so I'm supposed to preliminary provide some information on what this meeting is going to be about, stuff like that. And then it'll be perfectly clear. Next up, help is all around you. Obviously, try to get this stuff done yourself, and that's how you might feel after spending a morning trying to put together a notice of meeting or a proxy or something. But keep in mind, we're all here to help. Your fellow managers, your fellow board directors, your fellow regionals, anyone around you, we're all kind of in it together, which takes me to the next slide. Indeed, we are all in it together. That's a rather grim representation. I'd rather it look like this. And I hope that, once we've had a couple years of this under our belt, our collective belt, we'll all feel this way. I don't think it's ever going to be perfect unless everyone in this room is invited to a consultation process where we revise the forms in real time. But hopefully, if we keep working at it and keep sort of exchanging information and creating best policies on this thing, we can get there. So that's my top 10 tips. Now we'll get into some forms. We're going to go through we'll try to go through at least 3, if not 4 of the forms that I mentioned. And we're going to have them up online so that we can click if necessary. And folks, I don't purport to have all the answers. There are times, and you'll see today, where there are lines that even I don't really know the answer to, and my colleagues and I have discussed them, and we've come up with our best guess of what they could mean and what we think a fair answer is, and an answer that won't land you, in jail or dragged before the CAT or something, but we don't know what all the answers are supposed to be or are intended to be. But I think we've got some good leads. So the first is the preliminary notice of meeting of owners. Let me ask you a question. Why does this thing even exist?
We didn't know. We didn't know the meeting was going to be held in social.
That is I agree with the gentleman. I think that's the main reason. The government heard from people that a meeting would be sprung on them. They didn't hear anything from the board all year. They frankly didn't even get a call for candidates in some buildings, and all of a sudden out pops a notice of meeting saying that the incumbents are the only candidates with their names in the package, and away we go. And people didn't like that, and I think understandably so. So now we've got all kinds of fun, double level of notice for meetings so that people are pre-advised that a meeting is coming. They can do a couple of things that we'll touch on here, and then the eventual full notice of meeting and meeting package comes out, hopefully in a more fair and fulsome manner. That's for you to decide. First line there is section 1. The projected date of the meeting. You're pretty clear. You're going to put it in. Minimum how many days out you got to send this guy out before the actual meeting date? I'm hearing 35, 40, 45. At its tightest, it's 35. It's notice of 15 and the preliminary notice of no less than 20. I prefer if you get it out maybe 40, give yourself a little bit of buffer room in case something goes wrong and in case people are counting the first day and the last day or not counting it. I know there's different ways to do it in the industry. Let's say minimum 40. The rule is 50, at least 20 before your actual notice goes out. So we're assuming the notice goes out on day 15. What if the date changes from the time you send this preliminary notice out till the time you send your notice out because the church called and the basement's not available that day or something? What happens? You got to send out another preliminary notice? Who thinks yes? Hands up. Who thinks no? Who needs more coffee? I think the answer is no. The wording in there is projected date. Now, if you put off the meeting, change it by 2 months, I think it's only fair to people to send out a preliminary notice. If you change it by 2 days because of some scheduling problem, I don't think it's a problem as long as you, of course, adhere to the actual timing deadlines. That is a projected date in there. With that said, let's try to keep it on the button. The rest of the stuff, not so bad. Corporation, condominium management provider, or condominium manager, or any other person responsible for the management of the property. Who would be the third category there? Delivering information to that address. Any person responsible for the management of the property. Could be an administrator. Don't think it's going to be a mortgagee. It could be, let's say, a manager a board member who self-manages, maybe doesn't live on site though. Again, as long as you check something and have a clear address as to where stuff is sent, that's fine. The following stuff's probably okay, email, etc. Section 3, let's go to section 3, summary of the purpose of the meeting. I have seen in here one word. I have seen in here a recapitulation of the whole agenda. What do we think goes in there? Assuming it's an AGM, but it should be maybe a one-sentence tops explanation of what it is. Annual general meeting, requisition to vote on smoking rule, discussion meeting, requisition discussion meeting on lobby renovations, something like that. This is not the place to explain in depth the positions. It's not the place to set out the agenda. It's a quick hitter of what are top level elevator speech. What are we doing here? And next up, the nature of the business to be presented. Section 4. You tick off the boxes. You tick off what you are dealing with. Item C is an interesting one, if we want to expand it. This is a meeting to elect one or more directors, including a meeting requisition under Section 46 of the Condo Act, requisition meeting, that may include the election of one or more directors. The number of positions on the board that are or could be the subject of an election at the meeting and the term remaining, blah, 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 are. This one's a toughie. I've had two sides to thinking on this. One is, well, really anything could happen. Someone could have a bungee jumping accident between now and the meeting, so there's 5 members on the board, let's put 5 in there. I think the answer should be, from what you know now, the maximum number of people who could be elected at that meeting, barring any accidents. So if it's a normal AGM, the answer, and there's 1 spot, the answer is going to be 1. If it's a requisition meeting to remove a 3-person board, it's up to 3, right? So the answer is going to be 3. If for some reason they only dislike 2 people on the board, the answer would be 2 are up for election. I don't think it's the place to put the full complement of the size of the board. Similarly, next up there is the number of positions that are or could be the subject of election at the meeting and are reserved for voting by owners of owner-occupied units. What's the maximum number that could ever be in there?
1.
Yeah, it's going to be 1 or 0, depending on the nature of your meeting. And then, to answer, yeah, Lana.
The paragraph above those 2, is that paragraph for section 46 is referencing a requisition meeting? Are those 2 questions that are being referring to that paragraph, or is that both, are those standalone? How many for owner occupied and how many positions on the board?
Yeah. You've tapped into my, scroll up, back up a bit, yeah. Excuse me. I think it refers to above. The formatting in these forms is garbage, and they're not clearly broken out into what refers to what. But I think it's above, and I think above you would also lump in if there was an owner occupied into that total, and then below you say, yeah, yeah. And the reason we talk, I formulated my position earlier on that one was because later on they do ask you for the total number of positions on the board. Doesn't this seem like it should be pretty simple, but the form is just kind of weird? That's what I'm struck with, is if it just said, how many people are on the board? How many people are up for election? Like, well, it seems like it should be easy, but it's deceivingly weird. If you want your intention to be a candidate for election to the board, including the upcoming notice of meeting, you must notify the board in writing of your name, address, and your intention no later than. This is an interesting one. This is just when to get your candidacy and your disclosure in if you want your name in the package. What's the timeline? How do you calculate the timeline to tell them when they've got to get it in by? I'll tell you. The answer is it has to be at least 15 days after the preliminary notice went out and at least 1 day before the notice is to go out. So you got to, again, get out that free calendar, block it off, 1 day back, 15 days in, and that's a date that you provide to them. So if you send the prelim out a bit earlier, you can build yourself a little bit of a bigger cushion to accept. Meeting to remove or appoint an auditor, The removal doesn't happen all that often, but we're now seeing, from time to time, a name thrown into a point. You put that in there. Next up, this is a meeting for the purpose of considering an addition, alteration, et cetera, et cetera. I'll get you in a sec. This is going to be for two things. Section 97 type notices that are going out and may have to be voted on, or some of the new EV charger notices that go out and may have to be voted on. Yeah?
Question about that auditor checkbox. The auditor is always appointed by the owners to serve for 1 year. So if this is a notice for an AGM, would we typically check that because we are always going to be appointing?
Exactly right. It seems like a strange formality to put, but exactly. If it's an AGM, you're always ticking it.
And if we were to have owners remove the auditor, obviously we would have to do the legwork of including 3 quotes on the new auditors and put it in that package?
I don't think so, no. All you're going to do is, and we'll see it in a second, is take any material that comes in, make sure it's not wildly crazy, and then perhaps put it in the package as qualifications if the owner has requested. I don't think it's the board's job. If they're happy with Auditor A, all they do is you say it's recommended. And we'll see that in the proxy form and in the notice. Section 5. Now owners can request that material be included in the package. Do you have to include it? You do under one circumstance. What's that circumstance? If they accompany it by 15% of their fellow owners' signatures. Otherwise, it's voluntary. Okay? Other interesting question. What if they send you in something signed by 15% of the owners? Keep in mind, you're getting this maybe 2 days before the notice has got to go out. Saying, hey, you know what? 15% of us would like to see the last 24 months of minutes, all the engineering reports, all kinds of things. This is a little concern for me because it seems to be a way to sidestep potentially the request for records form. We've dealt with it once and we just went to the people asking. We said, look, this notice has got to go out. What if we sent out a condensed little supplementary thing or told owners, look, a request has been made, the material's available electronically or at the management. Work with it because I really don't want to see you mailing, if you're doing mail, this much material out with the package. It seems a bit ridiculous. And that's the preliminary notice. Again, we're moving fast, we're moving hard, we have limited time. We will, of course, be around a little bit later, or I will, for some questions if you have them. Next up is the notice of meeting. This one's, again, do away with your old notice of meeting form. I've seen a lot of packages that contain the old notice of meeting that was your style, plus this notice of meeting. I recently saw one stuck to the back of the package. Do away with the old notice. I like a cover letter. I like an information circular if that's your style. Don't put 2 notices of meeting in. Use this notice of meeting. This is now the notice of meeting. I'm going to say some things that are crazily basic, and I apologize. Sections 5 and 6 have to do with this being present at the meeting in ways other than in person or by proxy, and 6 has to do with other ways of voting, notably electronic voting. In order for either of these to exist, you have to have done that baby bylaw that enables different ways of being present, including electronically in the ether, and that you can vote in other ways, including electronically. If you don't have that baby bylaw, I call it a baby bylaw because it's the lower threshold under the changes to the Act, those would just both be no. If Section 7, here's an interesting one, it's just an instruction. It says if you wish to be present other than in person, fill out a proxy. Do you have to include a proxy form in the package?
Yes.
The answer, I just like to hear like a silence. The answer is no, but you should. But as part of should, you got to be, as we'll see, you got to be really careful in filling it out because it is a hornet's nest of disasters. But you should, and it should be properly expanded, and it should be fair. We'll get to that in a second. It shouldn't clearly drive the voter in one direction or the other, because I don't think that's particularly fair. Section 8B. So in 8 in general, you're now going to tick all the boxes that could apply. 8B is obviously going to be a biggie for an AGM or a requisition meeting, and now they're repeating the questions again. What are the maximum number of people who could be elected? What are the maximum 1, who could be an owner-occupied and elected, and total positions on the board. Then you go down, and here's the people who have notified them of their candidacy. On the right column, How often in your buildings do you get people who explicitly tell you they're only running for one or the other? No, you're an outlier. I'm just seeing shaking heads and then very often. I'm going to say not very often. In your building, your job's easy then because you know exactly what to put. In all the rest of the buildings, what do you tick? Keep in mind, owner-occupied just voted on by people who live in the building. I would say default to ticking both. If they're not clear and you haven't been able to follow up with a phone call or something like that, I would tick both to be fair to that candidate, assuming they are otherwise a qualified candidate, have given their disclosure, et cetera, et cetera. I just think it's the safer option. If at the meeting they wish to pull back their candidacy, then it's up to them, but I don't want to look like we are preemptively stripping them of the potential to run for one or both positions if they just assumed they were running for everything. Yeah?
Okay,
So that's just going to be a number.
right,
And then here we're going to put the people who've put their candidates. So let's say Jane Smith does want to run for AGM, and as you said, there's one general position coming up and one owner-occupied. Jane Smith, sorry for choosing such an Anglo name. Jane Smith, and then assuming Jane hasn't clarified, I would tick both boxes so that Jane could run for both.
And then an individual, like every box would be for every person that's running. So if you have 9 people running, you just keep adding boxes.
Absolutely right. And this button here, as Kevin said, this button's your best friend. Keep in mind, you can expand. I haven't actually tested. One day I'm going to have a scotch and test it, but I don't know how many times you can press it, but you can press it and get a lot of lines there, as many lines as you hopefully would need. Section 8C, this is a meeting to remove or appoint an auditor. The removal, hopefully, not going to happen because that's its own very specific type of meeting. The one we're going to more commonly deal with is the line below. And to Alana's earlier point, like the squishiness between these is just, and I have no degree in graphic design or anything, this just strikes me as terribly designed right there. But the second part's the part you're interested in. The candidates for auditor whose information was provided before a specified deadline are, and I've seen, and look, toes the line, I've seen auditor A, incumbent proposed by board. I'm okay with that. And then B, auditor B, submitted by owner in brackets. I'm okay with that. I think that's perfectly fair because I think it's also perfectly fair to communicate to the owners that the board is happy with the auditor and with the incumbent auditor. All right, section 8D. Oh yeah.
For an AGM where the board wants to recommend to reappoint the incumbent auditor, how bad is it if we don't include that section?
Yeah.
If we took it, of course it's an AGM, of course we're appointing an auditor.
Yeah. Would I invalidate that meeting or that appointment? No, I wouldn't. I'd love you to fill it in, but as long as it wasn't a challenged election, a challenge appointment, life goes on, but make sure you fill it out. 8D, requisition meeting. We all know requisition has to be included in a package for a requisition meeting, the actual received requisition. Do you / can you include the signature pages? Who thinks yes? Who thinks no? Okay, so 3 people care, and the answer is yes, you absolutely do. The signature pages are part of the requisition. You will often hear from a board, manager, or even the requisitions themselves. What about my privacy? What about privacy? Oh, privacy, pipita, privacy. If you live in a condo, you have waived certain privacies. If you have affixed your name to a requisition, it is right that the rest of your fellow owners know you've signed it and that you've put your name forth. It's part of being in a little condo democracy. So the whole requisition gets included in the package. All right, the rest not so bad. 8F, this is a meeting to discuss proposed changes to the declaration, description, bylaws, rules, or any agreements. I would, of course, include whatever is in there, whatever that rule or amendment is. Plus, it's often, and this isn't so much forms as it is just good practice, a little explanatory piece, especially if it's something a little tricky or complex as to why the board thinks that this is a good idea or being proposed or necessary or what have you. Okay, then we have section 9, additional material. This is additional material submitted by owners. What does this right-hand column mean? This material is being included at the board's discretion. This material is submitted to the board using the submission to include material in the notice of meeting of owners form. Simple answer. What's going on there? Here's my thought. The left, keep in mind, this whole section is about materials submitted by owners. The left is if it came in without the requisite 15%, and the board has agreed that it is a good thing to put in the package and is putting it through in the package. Right-hand column is if the person has actually used the 9-word named form there, the little requisition form, and actually has the requisite signatures to mandate that the material is carried forth into the form. Section 10, probably never ever going to be used, because I can't imagine a lot of bylaws mandating the inclusion of terrific amounts of further material. And then section 11, and this is a tricky one. Section 11 I often see just left off, and I don't think it's the worst, most grave flaw in the world, but this is, have we stuck anything else in here that's not required by bylaw, information pieces, what have you? Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. So if you have your information circular, I would list it there. If you've put some other kind of an engineering report or some kind of précis of the hallway renos, stick it in there. Insurance certificate.
I've got a board that puts in their, they track all their utilities, so they show when they put in the insurance power, how much they saved, when they wanted to retrofit, how much, and every year they do it.
I love it. I love that. And I would list it there. I would list it there. So that's the notice form. I mean, all told, not the worst thing in the world, just like kind of not the best thing in the world. All right, now we get to the P word, which is the proxy form. As far as I understand, the job of the proxy form was to try to clean up issues with the proxies used in the condos, I see laughs, in the province of Ontario. Were there problems? Yes. Generally, did those problems have to do with the fact that the form didn't make sense? Not so much. It had to do with some bad characters mostly. What does Trump call them? Bad dudes or whatever? It had to do with bad dudes and dudettes mostly. But instead, we have a proxy form that probably just as forgeable. Not that I think that way. I do think that way. I'm from Hamilton. But the injustice, as I see it, is that not only is it the same level of forgeable, it's actually impinging on people's ability to democratically cast their vote, because I will tell you, I'll be perfectly honest, as chair of AGMs, in many cases, if it's a highly contested one, we've got to go to the letter. But in a more friendly AGM, if the scrutineers and I and management aren't giving a little bit of leniency to the proxies, there'd be many meetings where we wouldn't even have quorum, because you could probably disqualify over half the proxies that have come in, and that's just not right. So let's try to see how we can get through it to maximize the adherence to the proxy. Right-hand column, total formatting disaster, because keep in mind, if you are not filling this out electronically with the nice blue, and you're just looking at it like this, it looks like that could refer to the top or could refer to the line below. And so I will often have people fill out the name of the proxy giver above instead of below. You only see that it's impossible to do when you're filling it out electronically. Has to be a registered owner or a mortgagee, or potentially a power of attorney if they are that person, which takes us down to this box here. In the case of the corporation, affix the corporate seal. Maybe I haven't been around long enough, I've never seen a corporate seal, but I have seen some corporate votes, corporate proxies. Affix the corporate seal or attach a statement that the person signing have the authority to bind the corporation. What does that look like? If you're at the registration table, what are you going to look for if it says that Unit 5 is owned by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Ontario Inc.? I'm hearing articles of incorporation. Anyone else? A form, special words, abracadabra. What do you got to see there at the registration table to know that you can register this proxy to the person who's brought it to you? I think that's all with respect about the articles of incorporation. I think all you really need is to say, you know, Joe Blow, I have authority to bind the corporation. It works on a contract, and I think it's all that is really required here, unless you have the corporate seal. I don't think they have to bring articles of incorporation saying that they are, or a binding resolution of the business corp saying that they have the authority to show up that day. Keep in mind, I'm getting law nerdy, business corporations are governed by something called the indoor management rule, which says that if someone presents ostensible authority to you and is willing to vouch and sign it, you as an entity are able to rely on that as a relying party. Doesn't work in condos, by the way, only in business corps. The second line, if you are authorized on behalf of the registered owner or mortgagee, attach a copy of the document that gives you this authorization. What's that begging for there? I heard it somewhere, power of attorney. That's where you're gonna have to have the power of attorney. All right. Signature is a biggie. I would say that this signature on the bottom right-hand page is probably the main signature in the whole document. There's also 85 other initials and signatures and garbage, but this is the biggie. If you don't have a signature down here, really tough to register this proxy properly or accept it at all. Okay, top of the next page, date. Oh, yeah.
What I find that's confusing and a lot, I find some owners forget, they write this address of the building, but they forget to write their suite. And when you have this a little squiggly, it's really difficult to figure out which unit do they belong to.
Yeah.
Because you're receiving all these proxies, but a lot of them are, they forget to write suite number in.
What I try to do there, provided they're not a multi-unit owner or something, if you know at least, if you're able to discern, if you've got the time or the ability, you know that Mrs. Chan is in that unit and no one's fighting you, I would register it, I would fill it in. If they own multiple units or if it's co-owned or if it's a particularly heated thing, you may have to not qualify it, but I've been to meetings like that and they go, it's not really clear, but I know Jeff is in 202, and so it's a bit of a judgment call every time. Date at the top of the next page, hopefully not a tough one to find out. But what's really crucial to note here, and especially for those tricky bylaw meetings where we have to adjourn to go get more proxies afterwards, is that you can keep these proxies. They've built into the form that it says at any adjournment of the meeting. So if you don't get it and you have to adjourn the proxy vote or whatever to go get some more stuff, or something else crazy happens and you have to adjourn, you can keep these proxies going forward. Name of the proxy holder. This is something we used to do pretty well in the form, although sometimes it was abused in our old forms. I like there to be a fallback option pre-inserted the same way you always did, and I don't think it's wrong to do so, to put president, to do president or failing her secretary. I like to put it in the second line to show that there is a person who will be your proxy if you want. Because keep in mind, you're not saying that that is the proxy. The person still has to initial beside it to choose that person. I like to leave the top line open. Remember I talked about making the proxy fair and not making it look like it was directing you in too close a direction? I like to leave the top line open so that the person, if they want to put someone else, if they want to put their neighbor as the proxy, they can fill it in themselves and initial beside it. Yeah.
I'm having my AGM soon, and I have one of the board members that most likely won't be elected, disputes this because in that main area there, we put the president of the board,
Mm-hmm.
and he's saying that it's illegal that we are actually appointing the president of the board to collect proxies or to giving the president
Yeah.
of the board authority.
You know how you deal with that? You keep it in there. And you, in your cover letter or your circular, you clearly explain the mechanism. You say, you may insert at line whatever there, top of page 2, someone you wish to hold the proxy. If you do not have someone and wish to have the president, initial beside that person's name below. Then with respectfully to that person, how can they truly debate that you're tricking anyone if you've explained it in the circular or the cover letter? That's how I would handle it. Yeah. Here? In case someone's ill, I would put, in one line I would put president of the board or failing him, her, the secretary of the board. Yeah. And don't make that a person who's up for election, please. If it's a current board member, thank you. Now we get to the heart of the whole day, the whole morning, and probably your whole weekend is this awesome next section, which started out, if you'll recall, on the initial iteration of these forms, looked a little bit different, and then no one knew what on earth was going on, so they fixed it a little bit, and it's not so terrible now. I think we know what it means. So, here's the types of proxy power that people can delegate to another person, to the proxy holder. Number one, proxy is not authorized to vote on our behalf with respect to any matter at the meeting, including matters of routine procedure. That's just a proxy for quorum. Simple as that. A person showing up at them might as well have handcuffs on, showing up for them. That's all it's there for. And that's fine if someone says, look, I want the meeting to go ahead, but I really couldn't care less. In fact, I anti-care. That's the one they would tick. Second one, the proxy may vote on our behalf only with respect to matters of routine procedure at the meeting and no other matters, as we could do if personally present at the meeting. This is going to be one that allows someone to show up. It's going to count for quorum. And that person can vote on the routine agenda items. Approval of minutes, appointment of the auditor, even though that's a separate box, I still consider that a routine item. Other agenda or procedural type things that come before the meeting. They will not be able to vote on election of directors or any special type elections or votes that are being held at the meeting. That's a matter of routine procedure, I think. The question was adjournment. And then the third one is the one that's the funnest, if that's a word, most fun. And this is the proxy may nominate candidates or may vote on our behalf with respect to all matters that may come before the meeting, subject to any instructions set out below, as we could do if personally present at the meeting. So, let's say this is the one that's ticked. And keep in mind, when they tick, they then have to choose, they have to initial, or signature or initial, beside the one they've chosen. And this also is sometimes a problem because people forget, because in this column you need to do no fewer than at least potentially 3 sets of initials. If someone ticks that and then doesn't do anything to the rest of their proxy, what would you do in terms of registration? They have to sign at registration anyway, of course, they're handing in a proxy, but in terms of voting, proxies, votes, ballots, what do you do, Alana? I would give them a ballot for any balloted item happening at that meeting, because the proxy giver is saying, you might as well, this person with one of those weird like latex masks, it's me. I'm at the meeting, that person's going as me. Give them the ballots, they can do whatever I could do, including ballots, okay? What if there is a general election and an owner-occupied election? This is an owner-occupied unit, so the unit would be entitled to vote for both. But the person only fills out later a vote for the general election, leaves the owner-occupied election portion blank. What would you do then? You say they won't be voting for the owner-occupied? Any other thoughts? I'm hearing, and this is why this is a bedeviling little section. It says, may vote on our behalf with respect to all matters that may come before the meeting, subject to any instructions set out below. My interpretation is if they've chosen to vote on one section but not the other section, the proxy holder gets a ballot for the other section. It doesn't say only if they tick one box, they're cooked. So if they fill out only part of the votes that fall, and this is why registration now is way more difficult, is you've got to go through that proxy and go, okay, they voted on this, didn't vote, they get 1 out of 3 ballots. Yeah, Barbara.
Assuming that those who designed this form were sane, what would be the purpose of such a box?
Of box 2? Yeah. I have no, honest to goodness, I don't really know. I warned at the beginning that I
think that by checking this first box, you are giving the option of not checking the second box. Again, assuming that those who designed this form would think.
You're talking about this first and second? Or this first and second?
Authorizing the proxy holder to vote for the owner-occupied.
Right. Oh, okay, the voting. I know, and that is the other interpretation, is once you touch one thing, is that the end of it. You've deemed what's going to happen. I don't know the answer. I know the interpretation that I've given. I think what an owner could do then, and I don't think any owner would ever do this, I'm just being creative, is say, I'm going to vote for thing here, and then in the other one put no vote or something like that to show that clearly they're not giving discretion. They're going no vote. But again, who's going to think to do that? And then what if they tick box 3 and then they fill out all the remaining votes? Pretty easy. That's it. Their proxy doesn't get any ballots at all. That's the easy one. And frankly, what we've seen most, the one that Babak and I have talked about, we don't see that often, thankfully. You mostly see tick box nothing else, give them the ballots, or tick box everything else, don't give them any ballots. Thankfully, hopefully. Okay? Section 1, the bottom, how are we doing for time? Oh yeah, look at that. Yeah.
So if we're not, as managers, we're not allowed to really influence the election process, and someone asks, or the owner asks, how do I fill out this form? How do you differentiate, like, giving advice on the procedure versus the voting?
I'm going to sound corny. Carefully, very carefully. The question was, given that under sort of new regulations, you can't be seen to be influencing the vote, how do you give instruction? Well, one thing to do is to circulate that beautiful guide, which we tried our best, with your package, or hand it out if someone comes to ask for it. If someone comes to ask you a specific question, what I would do is I would answer it, and then maybe, and I know this is extreme because you got enough things to worry about in the day, but so as not to be seen to have done anything wrong, maybe one-line email saying, hey, just want to confirm my advice that you fill it out by putting your chosen candidate in line A. That way there's some paper to back you up in case they say, well, I met with Robert and he told me who to vote for, which, let's admit, is not beyond the realm of possibilities. Here's a biggie, and it goes to my very favorite expand, add item button. When you're filling out the candidates in any of the sections that require candidates, here is how I would like to see you do it, okay? Let us say that there are 2 positions open, and you have 3 names who have put their names forth prior to the package going out. I would like to see you list those 3 names as candidates, basically 1, 2, 3. But keep in mind, someone may hate all those 3 candidates and may wish to choose 2 of their absolute own candidates to write in. I think it is imperative that you stick in 2 or however many open spots could be elected, spots below the pre-filled info. Otherwise, an owner who doesn't know to go online and get their own form so they can fill it out is now jamming stuff in, initialing, doing all kinds of stuff, which, again, depending on how clear or unclear it is, may disqualify their proxy. It's not fair to an owner, especially given that we're all working with this form together and trying to make the most of it.
Just the point on that, I guess, for clarification, wouldn't you want to put no candidates if you just want to use it for proxy as for form?
But this is, I'm sorry, I'm assuming that this discussion is assuming the one that you're putting into your package and that you're pre-filling.
Right, exactly.
So I want you to indicate those names that have come in as candidates. I think it's fair to them. They've given their disclosure. They've given their resume. Pre-populate them. Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand why. For me, all I care about is form. I don't care who they vote for.
Fair. I don't think it would be an untoward choice for a board to say, look, we got 3 spots. We're going to stick 3 blank lines. We're not pre-populating anyone's names. We'll give the names of the candidates in the circular. It's fine. Okay. Section 4. Section 3, owner occupied. Oh, sorry. Section 2, owner. Section 3, specific matters, bylaws, etc. Section 4, we get into tricky stuff because we get requisition, okay? So section 4, I'm going to blow it up. Look how much fun stuff is hiding when you expand that. We instruct the proxy to vote as indicated below with respect to the removal of directors from the board of the corporation. So assumingly here you're going to list, if this is a requisition to remove the board, the current ones who have been requested to be removed via the requisition. In favor of removal, I want them gone. Against removal, I want them to stay. Do you see a potential problem in the way that that is formatted or set out? Knowing what you know about voting? Jennifer? I like that. In terms of sort of human psychology, it's suggesting that the first choice, the best choice, is in favor of removal. I like that. Not what I was going to, but I actually really like that. Yeah?
So in this, you can actually remove particular people in the board, not
Yes.
everybody.
And that's right. That's the right of the person to do that. I love the president. Everyone else is garbage. I want to get rid of them. Yep, that's okay. If they want to be what? That's the earlier sections, right? So that's the earlier sections. Here's my concern, and it's a little bit cryptic, so I apologize. My concern is this. What voting is needed to remove a general director? 50% plus one of what? All owners what? All owners present at the, whatever, who are present by in person or by proxy, who are eligible to vote for the election of the general director. What's the voting percentage to remove an owner-occupied position? Of all owners what? Of all owners who are eligible to vote on the owner-occupied position. They've lumped it all together here, which means that when you're tallying these votes, you've got to put a little sticky note or a red flag in your brain that says, when I'm tallying the owner-occupied, even though they're all jammed together in here, I've got to consider a different voting majority for the removal of an owner-occupied position than I do for the removal of a general position. And that's often forgotten or overlooked, and it's also a little bit of a tricky one because it requires you to know how many owner-occupied position units you have. I don't think it's on purpose. I would like to believe none of this is on purpose, but just through competence. You know what? Let me correct that. I'd like to believe that this is on purpose, because otherwise it means that I don't know who's driving the boat. Okay? And that's it. And then keep in mind, lots of initials needed, lots of signatures all over the place. Okay? Yeah, and then first.
So if you only have one position for regular director, not owner occupied, so basically you have a whole or 2 pages of committees, do you need to include them in your
Here's what I would do. JJ, can you collapse like 1, 2, 3, and 4? The gentleman's question was, what if you only have one normal position coming up at one normal AGM for a general position? I'm going to expand section 1 and then scroll down. The other 3 won't be expanded. Do reproduce the whole form just so it doesn't look like you're pulling any monkey business, but you don't need all the extra boxes. Oh, good question. I would not double-side anything. Keep in mind the proxy was designed to be one-sided so that you could do this hilarious chicanery of blocking the right column. So new thing for those who didn't catch it, it's hilarious. The proxy, in order to increase photocopying costs, the proxy has to be one-sided only. The reason being, there's that right-hand column, and there is now, our policy was always if someone asked to see the proxies, they could either see one side or the other side. They weren't permitted to see both sides. Now it's official. An owner is not allowed to see a part of a proxy that has unit identifying information, which means that right strip. So if someone makes a request to see the proxies, you either have to rip it off or fold it under and make a photocopy, and they only get to see the voting, the left part. If you did it on both sides, you've got a lot more photocopying to do, essentially. It's not going to end the world, but I'd rather you don't do it thing. You would have to then fold both sides at different times. If someone were to request to see the proxies after the fact, keep in mind now, both they and the ballots are kept for 90 days. You don't need a motion at the end of the meeting anymore. The Act says they're both kept for 90 days, after which point they may be destroyed if there is no pending request or litigation regarding them or anything like that. Babak, sorry, I forgot you.
From the point of view of a unit owner, would you prefer to receive a hard copy of the proxy and fill it up? Or would you prefer to receive a note or a reminder from management on the board that you can click on this link and go online and use all the expansions and whatnot to fill out the proxy? Which one is the better way to go?
I know that I have a prejudice. I'd rather, the question was, would you rather, if you're a unit owner, yeah, exactly. If you're a unit owner, would you rather receive a hard copy that's kind of set in stone, or a link or reminder saying, go here and fill it out, giving you every possible permutation and option? Not even just because we're here at a Get Quorum event, but my strong feeling is it's the latter. I'd like to be able to fill it out with the fullness of my discretion and options. The only time that maybe doesn't work is your demographic. If you've got a real building that says they don't have computers, or those are also the same buildings who are terrified of cannabis. Sorry?
I'm a unit owner.
Yeah.
And we have two people that they don't have emails. So
So as I said, it's demographics. I find it nearly mind-boggling, but I understand that it does happen. But overall, I'd love to see it all go electronic.
How about both? Include the hard copy.
Yep.
But mention in the soft copy can be there.
Yep, the suggestion was include a hard copy, but then give them the link to the soft copy. I think that's brilliant, or to the service. I think that's brilliant because even if you include both, chances are I'm going to throw that hard copy in the birdcage, whereas I will click on that link, and therefore my vote will be counted and the building will get quorum. And so it's good.
A lot of people are not aware of the fact that there has been a lot of changes since November, because I had calls actually yesterday. Why are we changing this? Last year they didn't have to go through all this, complicating their lives. They don't even know how to leave the proxy now.
Absolutely. And frankly, I don't blame them. Considering the amount of work it even took us, and we do this every single day for 100 hours a day, to get our brains around it, yeah. I brought on that point, I brought some booklets of our changes to the Act. I didn't hand them out because some of you might already have them, but if you do want one, they're over there, and if you want to reproduce them for your owners, if you do have a section that's particularly helpful, go ahead, just keep our name on it. Yeah, of course.
For signatures, does it have to be original, or can they just be like rendition, photocopy, or something? So the reason I'm asking is sometimes people shoot me an email with their proxy.
Yeah.
Or they may have taken a picture with it and sent it through.
Yeah. I'm okay with copies, assuming that there is a level of verifiability or trust to them. Sometimes you'll get a requisitionist group or a very sticky board that says, no, this is not the original signature. How do you prove that? Do you have a specimen signature? The answer is it's their signature, and unless you're aware of fraud, I would accept it. Furthermore, the Electronic Commerce Act states that a electronic signature, be it a facsimile or a reasonable I hereby vote electronically, is acceptable. So unless you have reason for your antenna to go up, I would accept it. Yeah. Okay, so we've got a few minutes left. I'm going to try and bang into the pick very quickly before we move to questions. Yeah.
Is it necessary to fill that identification number? Maybe?
Great question. Really good question. The front page of the proxy has something called identification number. In the past, we said that you would only be able to give out sort of fixed or stamped or single-use only proxies if your bylaws permitted you to add requirements, a submission deadline, various whiz-bang things. Otherwise, an owner has always been entitled to just use their own whatever proxy they want. In the past, it could be literally almost be anything. Here, there's something called proxy identification number, optional. Now, you have the ability, if you wish, to, if it's an election of particular concern, to track the proxy specifically and say, this is the number that you have to use. I haven't seen a building do it yet, per se, but that is the answer. And the answer, the gentleman's question is, no, you do not have to fill that out. In fact, most buildings do not. I'm more concerned with that it's filled out properly and that it's signed properly. I think it's a lot of extra effort and almost kind of anti-democratic to say you have to use this exact copy. Okay, the pick. We've got about 10 minutes. I'm going to blast through the pick. The pick is the one we're getting also a lot of calls on. It's not a meeting-related one, so I wanted to get through those because that was more the thrust of this morning. But let's take a look at some of the pick. The pick contains the best brain teasers of all. It's my absolute favorite form for lack of logic. So, just being honest. Okay, I've got a lot of comments on the pick. I'm going to zoom to the ones that I consider the most hilarious. So, bottom of page 1, number of leased units. The corporation has received notice under Section 83 of the Condo Act that X units were leased during the current fiscal year. What do you put there? Sorry? Kevin's got it. As many as have given you proper notice under Section 83. I will sometimes have a manager or board say, but look, I know that 80% of the units are rented, but I've only gotten 3 Form 5s. It's 3. The answer is 3 units, because the obligation on you in this form is how many have told you and done it right. I mean, it suggests you might need to go on a bit of an enforcement tear, but for this form, it's 3. Yeah.
So do you think that Form 5 is the old because I've had notifications, it's not.
Fair, or a copy of the lease, or if you have let's be fair and broad, if you have a tenant sign-up sheet that isn't officially that, and it's your way of doing it, and you track it properly, go with that. What I don't want to see is you go through the registration list, you go, that unit is, that unit is, that unit is, and just off the top of your head, I don't want it to be done that way. But that's a really good point.
I've also done it that if I know I have outside addresses and different names in the unit, even if I don't have a form, I'll include them.
Mike, I would be careful of that, because it doesn't become a leased unit just because someone has an off-site address. Maybe it's their summertime pied-à-terre. So I'd actually exclude. I'd exclude those. Yeah.
So this number is the same as the status certificate disclosure number? Because it sounds like you're...
That's right.
So both numbers would be potentially changed if you're using that resident information for tenant sign-up sheets. You say that would qualify to add a number?
Yeah, I'm trying to be fair. Remember, I try to look at these documents purposively. If you're going at strict Section 83, it's who's giving you your Form 5 or copy of the lease. If you have a regime where you have a tenant registration form and you track it closely and what have you, I don't think you're going to get yourself in any trouble by using that number. What I don't want is spitballing based just on who you think is renting or not renting. Yeah. Okay. Section 2, make sure you fill it out carefully. I could waste a bunch of time on it, but I won't. Section 3, insurance. This is a fun one. You got to put the policy, you got to put the deductible, and you got to put, with respect, this is the part that I love, with respect to this deductible, the maximum amount that could be added to an owner's common expenses under Section 105(2) of the Condo Act. So the way I've commonly seen this is insurance policy, Matron's Council. Deductible, $10,000. Third line, blank, or $10,000, or nothing. I don't think that's the level of detail we need to bring to bear. I think we need a little more. And that is, I would prefer that in the left hand, keep in mind, the purpose of this is to give owners information on what's backstopping the corporation and its risks. I like to see in the left-hand column the type of risk set out. So, boiler insurance, general liability, directors and officers liability in the left-hand column. Each individual deductible in the right-hand column. We know there can be different deductibles for different parts of the coverage. And then the right-hand column is the part I hate because it requires us all to sit and just become like lawyers or insurance adjusters all of a sudden, especially dealing with insurance deductibles, which we already know are the nastiest thing in the whole industry to figure out. You've got to figure out which of these could foreseeably ever be charged back to a unit under a circumstance. So, water escape, yeah. Fire, yeah. But could you ever have a deductible chargeback per se for flood, external flood? Unless someone left their windows like a big hole gaping beside their unit or something in the face of a flood warning, I would leave that one at 0 because you're really not going to charge certain types of coverage back. There are some that will never trigger a deductible. I don't like this because it really requires you to sit and think that through for the corporation. Not that I don't like thinking, it's just that, yeah. My favorite of all time then is over the page, which is the question that says the corporation has or had a legal obligation to maintain insurance aside from the insurance described in section 39, 99, and 102, and those are board insurance, property insurance, and occupiers and boilers insurance. Those are the ones the Act says you have to have. At any time during the fiscal year, did the corporation have to, by way of a shared facilities contract or some other obligation, have to carry any other insurance? Let's look at the options. Let's tick yes. Cool, okay, yep, yes. Let's tick no. Huh? Is the answer I didn't? Like what? We didn't? It's just an error in the form. We've told them many times. I don't know if you know Audrey Loeb of our group with whom I work. She's a teller, and she has told them, and this is it. I consider a fun little Easter egg, as they say in the video games industry.
Quick question, just back to the insurance.
Mhm.
What about saying see attached including this insurance certificate?
I would. My problem with that, not a problem, you're still going to have to lay out the parts that could be subject to a deductible.
Okay, but how about just that section? Where you said one, the boiler, general, because it's there. It's not as if we have to repeat something. It's in the main.
So if you answer yes, you're saying?
And just say see attached when you have to do the 4 disclosures on that required insurance.
The certificate not always has it.
Because it includes the deductible.
I guess I'm not following the question. So this, but then how do you equate which part could be a chargeback? That's the only sticky wicket. And that's why this is not really a great or fair form, because it requires you to almost do a deductible chargeback analysis.
So put one attached to bylaw provision
For what?
for the insurance deductible.
It's not going to help because it's so situation. The question was, could you just attach your insurance deductible bylaw? You still then have to interpret and try and apply that bylaw. So this is one, and this is not I haven't said call your lawyer once this morning. This is one where you might want a quick ringy-dingy. Thank you. Because it's a weird one. Couple more minutes and then we should be able to get through this. Number 4, budget. Another tops. The budget of the corporation for the current fiscal year is accurate and may result in a surplus, a deficit, or neither. Guess it's how you determine accurate, because if it's a deficit, I don't know. Here's what we've put our heads together and think this might mean. That it's accurate in as much as it contains all of the items that are budgeted and expected for the year. For instance, if you had an unexpected new expenditure, you have issued perhaps an amended budget. And then the second part is, okay, and where are we going to fall on it? My only concern with that is, what if, and you've probably got bigger problems if this is the case, what if you don't feel your budget is accurate? What if the budget does not seem accurate? It almost presupposes that you've got an accurate budget, and then you're going to fall somewhere on the continuum. And I don't know the answer. Another point, and I'll get you in a sec, the other question we get is, what if we're in the first quarter, and we've got front-ended expenses and what have you, and we have no idea if we're going to be surplus, deficit, or neither? I think it's fair at that time to take the third, but don't take it blithely. If you already know you might be going one direction or the other, I'd rather you pick one of those. Yeah. Someone asked me that, and I'm not an accountant. The way I would treat it is, if you are intending that the application of the surplus monies plus the deficit account will lead to level water, I would say surplus or neither. I wouldn't call it deficit for the very reason. I want this form to be fair. If you think we're in trouble, I want you to put deficit, but if you know we're good, in fact, we had a surplus, I'd be okay with you putting neither or yeah.
Just do neither surplus nor deficit.
Or surplus, but yeah, assuming we're in that first quarter of the year, probably neither. Well, it's a great question. The question is, if you put surplus and then the next time you put deficit, are you in trouble? Here's a fun one. Status certificate at Section 76 of the Act has consequences. It says, if it's filled out wrong or not filled out at all, the corporation is bound to be deemed A, B, C, and E, and also D. No one really knows what the PIC is all about, other than saying that you could bring an enforcement application that the board hasn't given it to you or something. There's no explicit consequence for the PIC other than a complaint to the CAO that you're not filling out your forms and stuff. So I don't know. I don't know.
Because it could be that you're putting surplus, because that's what you think.
Yeah.
But then you have some kind of an unforeseeable, I don't know, flood, a pipe burst or whatever.
If you're acting honestly, that's not going to come up at all. As long as you're acting honestly, this could change. Things change, we know that. I don't have a concern that any of these answers are going to harm you if you have a good reason for why you gave them. Okay, let me, Lana, one more and then I'm going to move on. I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer. If the board felt that was ethically the right thing to do. I'm okay with it. I assume then I'd be okay with that, yeah. I really don't know. Again, I look at it proposively, and if you know you have the money at the beginning of the year and you're going to hopefully end up at a certain place, I think that's the purpose. But if indeed that's called a deficit budget, maybe you feel it's more important to write that in. I don't feel strongly. Insurance. Section 4, just insurance stuff. Oh, the final one I will touch on here is the bottom of page 3, section 4, page 3, which is the anticipated expenditures to be made from the reserve fund in the current fiscal year in accordance with the corporation's budget amount to. What do you put in there? But what do you list? Do you just copy the reserve fund study of whatever it says was due for this year? That's a dirty one, huh? I'm picking up on the word anticipated. To me, anticipated requires us to turn our thinking caps on. And so what most buildings are doing, or I think the most cautious, and I like it, is they are putting the reserve fund listed items in there, but you've also got to put your thinking cap on. If you know that the reserve fund said boiler in 4 years, because you haven't updated your reserve fund in a couple of years, and the boiler is being done next year, you also add boiler in there. I don't think it's good enough to just say, here's what the reserve fund says, even though we know other things are going to be happening this year. And then the final little question in that section is the one above. In accordance with the budget of the corporation for the current fiscal year, the annual contribution, oh no, sorry, that's not the one. Sorry, it's the one below. The current plans, if any, to increase the reserve fund under a plan proposed by the board under subsection 94(8) of the Condominium Act for future funding of the reserve fund are. What do you put in there? What do you put? Is it a number? Is it that plans are good? What do you put in there? You're not putting, there's no plan? Keep in mind, 94(8) is any plan, including if you just adopt the reserve fund study and send out the Form 15. So you always have a plan to increase the reserve fund. It's not just where you're, and this is a question that often comes up, it's not just when you're derogating from what your reserve fund study engineer has proposed. My problem is I don't know what you put here, so here's what I'd like to see. I don't think you say see Form 15 attached. It's a lot of paper and a lot of aggravation. I would say one of two things. I would say see copy of Form 15 available from office, or I would maybe lay out for the remainder of maybe a 3-year gap what your contributions are going to be for the coming 3 to 5 years or something like that. This question doesn't beg a clear answer of what it is, so I'm trying to, again, think proposively. What can I offer the owners here that will give them the info that's actually being expected, which is, what's the roadmap in the reserve fund look like for the next few years? Okay. Could have spent way more time, and I'll get you in a sec, could have spent way more time on the pick, just could have, but we've got limited time. This gentleman and then that gentleman. I would say something like that. 2018 X, 2019 Y, 2020 Z, something like that. Again, just so that you're giving some roadmap information on the reserve fund future. Yeah. Oh, great question. The question is, what if you're contributing to more than one reserve fund? What if you have an in-building reserve fund and a shared reserve fund that you're contributing to? I think you expand it to the extent possible, and you. I'm okay with that. I'm also okay with you saying see Schedule A, and instead of doing it with the sheet, which could get complicated, just do a white page that says boom, boom, boom. I'm okay with that. I know you are, but I also don't. The gentleman's saying, is that okay because we're doctoring the form if we put a Schedule A or something? First of all, there's no pick court yet. Secondly, I'm always going to support you if you're doing something that's to the fare of the owners. If you're saying I added that sheet because the form is deficient and doesn't make it clear how I answer, I'm okay with that. If you're leaving something out or changing wording nefariously, then you're getting yourself in trouble. Oh, I'm sorry. The gentleman's question was, I'm on a board, and how much of this is on me versus how much of this is on management, especially because most of this info is, at least at first reach, in management's hands. I think you handle it this way, is that the board, and hopefully the mandatory training thing is going to help this, has to have a general understanding of the obligations. I don't think you have to be the one to go compile the numbers, but you have to have a general understanding and say, manager, did we do picks coming up? Did we do our picks for this year, or we got the budget out? And then it is up to them to come to the board with a draft saying, here's what it looks like, please look it over. The numbers are as I've pulled them from the system. If you have any questions, let me know. If you think it's not clear to your owners, let me know. And if not, give me your sign off. So it's not up to you to prepare, but I think because the buck ultimately stops with you at the board, it's up to you to kind of keep an eye to make sure it's getting issued. In your situation, the question was, what if someone decides they want to be a board member the day before, or even at the meeting, and there's a bunch of proxies with their names on it, meaning they went door to door. They weren't in the package, but they went door to door in the meantime because they had a change of heart, and they got a bunch of proxies. I think those proxies count. There's nothing in the act that says you can't go door to door soliciting for proxies who will be nominated at the meeting. So I maybe take a different view. But one more question on the record. Who wants to be the lucky one that better be a good one? Maybe there's no more questions. Maybe I'm presumptive. I don't know.